we're now going to approximate roots, particularly square roots here. So sometimes you don't have a calculator, but you still need to know roughly where a particular root falls. For instance, let's start with something simple. We have the square root of 3. And we don't have our calculator, so we can't get it on a good approximation, but we still want to know the ballpark. Well, what we do is we look at the perfect squares around 3. And in this case, and we can actually use strictly less than, because if you know it's a perfect square, then you can reduce it exactly. But that's the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. 3 is between 1 and 4, and those are the two closest perfect squares then. So this reduces to 1 is less than the square root of 3, which is less than 2. So our result is somewhere between 1 and 2. And to get a little bit farther than that, 3 is closer to 4 than it is to 1, so it should be closer to 2 than it is to 1. So let's get our calculator and let's see. We're going to take 3 and let's take the square root of it. 1.73. So our approximation of 1.73 is right, and that's between 2. So it works. We know roughly where it's at. A little more than 1.5, not quite 2. But it's in there. It's working on it. So we can do that with any numbers. So if we have the square root of 20, we say, oh, the perfect square bigger than that is 25. Oops, and this is less than. And the one smaller than that is 16. So that means my answer for the square root of 20 has to be between 4 and 5. And 20 is almost halfway in between the two. It's a little bit closer to 4 than it is to 5. So I'm expecting it to be 4.5-ish, but a little bit lower. So again, we can grab our calculator. 20 root 2, 4.47, which is less than 5. Okay, the next one's going to be a little bit trickier. Suppose we want to know what the square root of 145 is. Well, that's between 169, which is a perfect square I recommend you memorize, by the way. It's going to get used a lot in this chapter, and the square root of 144. So this reduces to 12 is less than 145, which is less than 13. And 145 is so much closer to 144 that I'm sure it's going to be really, really, really close to 12. So we grab it, 145 root 2, 12.04. So 12 is less than 12.04, which is less than 13. Remember, these are approximations, but that's what we're trying to do anyway, is just figure out roughly where it's at so that we can ballpark it and we can see in our mind, yeah, that makes sense. That seems to be between 12 and 13, closer to 12.